every single one of us has a meaningful, purposeful identity and location and set of skills that we are like lending to the universe for the moment that we're here. And they have value that they're contributing. We just need to curate that place inside of ourselves through a process of having boundaries, but also spending time alone. Learn to trust that place.
All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the show. Welcome to What You Don't Hear. Toss in those headphones, pull up a seat. It's time to get to know somebody a whole lot better. This is a life podcast. It's an open journal dive into people's lives as I sit and I uncover the real story behind my guest journey, finding out what makes them who they are, talking about all the ups, all the downs, all those thoughts and feelings in between, as we dig into the parts of their story that we otherwise wouldn't get to hear. I'm your host. My name is Ross Theisen. I'm a creative of many kinds, a maker of many things, sometimes maybe too many things. But hey, here is a reminder up front to make sure that you're subscribed to this show on whatever platform that you're checking this out on right here, right now. Whether it be Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube, find that like or follow button and hit it for me if you would be so kind. And if you really like the show, and you want to make sure you don't miss any of it, you can follow us around social at WYDH Pod. And listen, I get it. You hear these things all the time from every creator, every single day, everywhere, on all the platforms. But we got to ask these things because it truly does help more than you may think. The support goes a really long way in helping me continue to make all of these creative endeavors happen. And speaking of support, I'm lucky enough to have some partners and supporters of this show in the form of sponsorships. So I've got a few of those to tell you about right now, and then we'll get into this week's conversation. All right, if you or someone you know is looking for a place to live, well, you may want to listen to this next part because this episode is sponsored by River and Rich. Located in the Franklinton Arts District of Columbus, River and Rich is that set of colorful buildings right there on Rich Street, and they want you to know that Franklinton is a real cool place to live. Now, River and Rich brings together quality apartments, desirable amenities, and a vibrant artistic community. They offer 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, and townhouse-style apartments, all with open floor plans, oversized windows, and modern finishes. The amenities include a huge 24/7 gym, a heated pool, a fully stocked coffee bar, a secure package delivery room, pretty much everything you'd be looking for in a place to live. And it doesn't just stop at the building, because River and Rich embraces and connects with the art-filled Franklinton community around them, with local art and murals featured all throughout the building and the community itself. River and Rich is both a place to go home to and is also becoming a living piece of art in its own. So if that sort of environment sounds like one that you want to live in, well, you can. So go check it out. They offer both guided and self-guided tours, so you can go check out an apartment anytime. Visit their website at riverandrichcolumbus.com for more information. Also, check this out. Because you listen to this podcast, I might be able to help you get a freaking apartment, you guys, because for right now, new applicants can receive up to half off their security deposit if you use the code WYDHPOD when applying. So again, for more information, please contact River and Rich. Certain restrictions might apply. Hop over to riverandrichcolumbus.com to get things going and go join the colorful life over at River and Rich. This episode is also sponsored in part by Promo West Productions. So if you live in or around the Columbus, Ohio area, and you're interested in catching a live show, going out and getting that live music experience, then you may want to check out one of these upcoming concerts coming your way via Promo West Productions. They've got Mother with Winnetka Bowling League at Newport Music Hall on Thursday, September 26th. If you've never listened to Winnetka Bowling League before, you definitely should. I'm also sure that Mother is also very tight. Then, Sleeping with Sirens comes to Kemba Live on September 27th. Then the Airborne Toxic event goes down at Newport Music Hall on September 29th. And then Doc Robinson comes to Newport on Friday, October 4th. So if you want to grab tickets to any of these events, well, you can. All you got to do is jump over to AXS.com, or as always, for any information on these or any other upcoming concerts. If you want to know who's coming to town and when, you can find all the info that you need over at promowestlive.com or follow them online at promowestlive. Okay, so this episode this week is absolutely an amazing conversation with one Brandi Lust. Brandi is a speaker and one of the hosts of Creative Mornings, a very, very cool event that you should know about and I should go to a whole lot more here in Columbus. She's written a book. She hosts the Something to Normalize podcast. And seriously, she is one of the easiest and most fun people to talk to ever. Plain and simple. We literally talked for probably an hour or more before we ever hit record for this episode. So we were deep into many topics and many things by the time we got started actually recording for this conversation, for this podcast. So the conversation just kept rolling on. We cover a lot of good stuff in this one. We cover a lot of workplace-related ideologies given what she does for her job. We talk about what makes a good leader and what allows for sometimes just the loudest person in the room to become one. More so, how to build an actually good workplace culture and what goes into that, the value of communication, trust and respect, how she's uncovered her personal self-confidence as well, often, as we all do, by going through some really difficult times. And yes, she has tons of amazing advice about all of it. I don't think I could say enough good things about Brandi here. Obviously, I'm always stoked on the guests that come onto this show and share their stories and perspectives with me. It's always a blast. It's always fun. So yes, of course, I'm going to say that Brandi rules. But trust me when I say it, Brandi freaking rules. So let's get to it. I think you're going to love it. She has an absolutely infectious energy about her that you will undoubtedly want to hear more of. And listen, I mean, she teaches people for a living, from school kids to business owners and teams, and she's even taught the teachers themselves about a lot of things. So I'll say it for her. She knows what she's talking about when it comes to a lot of these things that we cover in this episode. But it's time for you to find that out firsthand. Let's get to know Brandi a whole lot better right here, right now. It's episode 120 of What You Don't Hear. We just had like a podcast-worthy conversation, I would say, for about an hour before we actually sat down to make this happen. So I feel like we're good and ready to go, I would say,
that sounds
to
great.
make this happen. So officially, Brandi, welcome to the show. Thank you for doing this.
Of course. Happy to be here.
Like I said, we have already been well into the conversation at the point that anybody will be hearing us talk at this point. It's wild. Like, as soon as you got here, we immediately were just like, so what's life like? And here's what's wrong with the creative world. And here's all the struggles and everything, which I super appreciate. Because sometimes when I'm meeting somebody for the first time and they come in here, I'm like, again, they know what they're signing up for. I would say they're willing to be on a podcast, so they're willing to talk and share. But a lot of the times I'm like, oh man, like, I don't know. Like, are they just coming in to like tell me what they do for a living and that's it? And so knowing that we are not going to have a problem talking about literally anything is a super nice start to this.
Well, I definitely have a high threshold for like deep conversations. I don't have a level 2. I only have like a level 7 to 10 as far as the conversations that I have with people. So, that makes sense.
Yeah, being able to literally just take the deep dives we already have. I'm like, oh yeah, we're fine. Like the entire time we were talking, I'm like, oh man, we need the microphones and the cameras now. Like we're diving into so many things. And a lot of that was, we were talking so much about like the weird transitionary period that you feel like you are in, that I feel like I'm in a conversation that I feel like, I don't know if you've been having that with a lot of other people and been hearing a lot of those similar things like that. Like I was telling you, those sort of conversations I have been having nonstop with people. Where maybe not necessarily a career change like I'm thinking, but just that uncertainty of like, I'm kind of doing my thing, but it's not necessarily working the way it used to. And especially in the creative world, that strange defensiveness that's coming with a lot of creative endeavors right now and work. And I'd love to dig more into like, what does that look like for you of even, again, we had already been talking about it. So I'm trying to kind of like catch up our audience here, but also kind of reestablish what we were talking about. But while also keeping the conversation going so we're not just rehashing for an hour. But I guess like, what is that transition period you feel like you are in right now? Because again, for me, I'm like, I know who I am. I'm confident in who I am. I'm very clear on who I am. But also it's like I have all of these like skills and all this energy that I want to give, but I don't see the path to give it in. Like, does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. So you were asking, where am I with my own sort of transition and where am I at this moment? And I could talk about that personally, or I could talk about that creatively and professionally.
Yeah. Literally whichever realm you want to take it in is 100% like wherever you feel like you're at the most, where you're like, this is really what I'm working on. Like,
yeah, well, it is both at the same time, to be honest. You know, definitely as a creative, the analogy that I always use is that essentially we're surfing and like looking for the next wave, and sometimes you land that amazing wave where it's like you have the right language and the right tools to meet people's needs at the exact moment. And that's incredible, because then you're just riding something that feels like transcendent almost, like this opportunity was just kind of gifted to you. And then there are other times where the opportunities, like you're catching a wave and it's crashing before it really turns into anything. And then there are times when you're just kind of waiting and there's nothing happening. And I feel like right now where I am is, you know, I've caught some waves that did not give me that transcendent feeling yet. Like I'm just not there with what my next step is. And so I'm just in the water kind of trying to be patient. And I feel like I don't have a lot of control over that process. And like when the thing hits and it's the right next thing, that's part of being a creative. And I think that folks who have those like jobs where they work 40 hours a week and they're in an office and they know what the expectations are, there's this illusion of safety that's created with all of that. And I feel like for a lot of creatives, really, we're just more attuned to how things actually are, and that we don't always have control. We don't know what's going to happen. And so that's where I am creatively. And then personally, I'm also in a huge transition. You know, I recently moved out of my family home. I had been living with a partner. We had been together for essentially my entire adult life. I realized that I was gay late in life, and for the first time in my adult life, I'm living by myself. And I am navigating personally this transition where, similarly to you, I know a lot more about who I am. Like, a lot of things make sense now in a way that they didn't before. But I'm also having these human experiences that I think other people were having all along. But like, I didn't fully get that there were things that I wasn't feeling or knowing because I didn't know this part of myself, if that makes sense. So it's almost like I'm a teenager again, but I'm 42.
Right. A teenager with actual knowledge of how to navigate life.
Yes. Yeah. So that's nice, because I am coming with like the life experience of someone who has like done their work and like tried to show up for myself. And at the same time, there are so many things that I don't know about me right now. So it's an interesting combination of things.
Yeah. Well, then you almost get that more intentional excitement of trying new things and figuring out that next phase, or trying new things in general, because you can kind of almost do them with intention.
That's right.
You can go through with some pre-set up filters of like, I know I do and do not like this, but we're going to try this within those bounds, within like that guidance, where when we're younger, we're just like, I have no idea. This could be stupid. It could be not. I'm just going to, whatever. And then we navigate life like that. And it's like brings larger failures. But I think once we are what I'll call actual adults and we've got some knowledge and some experience there, we can kind of navigate those things a little bit more clearly. Like, that's where I feel like I'm at with so many things, where I'm like, I'm super confident in who I am and I know what I do and do not like, but I have no understanding of like, what avenue should I actually be taking that in? And we were talking a lot about before of just like, kind of almost just taking whatever those paths are with that self-belief a little bit of, all right, well, I know who I am, know what I like and what I don't like, and cool, we're just gonna kind of be in the now. Yeah. And I'm going to trust this risk or trust this chance. Even if I don't know how it's going to pay off exactly, I'm still going to kind of follow my gut a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting because in my personal process, there were moments where like I had to trust my past self. Like my past self had made a decision that my current self actually didn't even understand anymore.
Yeah.
And like those were moments when I'm relying upon the wisdom of a me that like doesn't exist in the same way in this moment. But I'm like, I'm going to keep trusting that that person knew what was going on, because right now things are so crazy that I can't have clarity about like what's happening.
You want to know something weird? Like, I think this will make sense. Or maybe I just ramble and I'll be like, oh, what, edit that out later. I feel like the way, like the trajectory that my life took, almost like you said, where you were like, I feel like I almost kind of did the opposite of what a lot of people I know did. I kind of feel like I'm maybe on that opposite end, where for so many years my life was, yes, I'm trying to navigate freelance and self-employment, but also even personally, it was like, relationships never worked, and there was always these weird things that would happen and all this sort of stuff that was like, oh man, I'm kind of continuously being beaten down and losing this thing that I thought I wanted so bad. And obviously lessons come from all of that stuff. Yeah. But while all of that was happening, I was watching friends, go to college to get the job and be in a relationship for, years upon years, and kind of have that like perceived safety net, and me sitting and being like, wow, like I got cheated on, or I got whatever. And look, wow, why are my friends just so happy in this relationship? And they've just got this job. And I'm sitting here like, not only like hoping a girl wants me back, but also begging a client to pay me. Like, how the heck did I end up over here in almost this, I want to say dysfunctional, but I guess maybe, and I don't mean this word as harsh as it sounds, but almost like broken path, right? And not in the sense where I was unhappy with the life that I was choosing. Obviously, we always hope things work out when we're in the middle of them. But, yes, I wanted to be a self-employed person, and relationships and self-employment are not exactly the same thing, but all happen, right? And for me, it was like this weird trajectory where I was like, man, look, why can't I find a relationship? Why can't I like nail down this career thing? And I'm watching all these other friends like have all of this stuff sort of. And now it's almost the opposite, where I'm finding myself, because I went through all of that weird stuff, I'm now clearer on who I am. Yeah. I'm now more confident in who I am and what I want and don't want, the respect, the boundaries, what do I want in a relationship? What do I want in a partner? What do I not want? Because I've seen all these examples of what didn't work, right? Yeah. In both career and life. It's like, because I personally had the experience of so many ups and downs, like you were saying earlier, it almost built up a lot of these qualities and skills that I now have, where when something does pop up, I'm like, oh, cool, I've got it. And what I'm starting to notice is a lot of my friends don't have that. Yeah. When something does go wrong with their relationship they were in for a super long time, or when something does go wrong with their job or their career, they're like, oh my God, this is terrible. I don't know what to do. And not that it's not terrible and hard, but it's like, it's such a weird thing to now have those conversations.
It's a disruption from their normalcy versus being the reality of just lived experience.
Right. Right.
I think that a lot of people establish that foundational experience, and be it a relationship and the career and those sort of things, and then the trajectory just seems really clear, and then anything that is different becomes a disruption. It's like, this isn't what's supposed to be happening, versus like if you've lived in existence like you or I have, where you are not really sure what's going to happen next month, because you're having to figure that out in an ongoing way. And that might be personally, that might be professionally, it might be both at the same time. It sounds like it has been both at the same time for both of us. That creates a new normal where like you're learning to grapple with how things are changing and how you're changing in an ongoing way. And like that is closer to how life actually is. Like, things going off the rails isn't a disruption of what's normal. Things going off the rails is the normal, but people can really protect themselves from that. And then I think as folks get older and, maybe it is a relationship that fails, or maybe it's that they really realize, I'm super unhappy in this career, that this trajectory that I've been on this whole time, or especially with aging, parents or people getting sick, or they're getting sick, and it's so disruptive to like the psychological foundation of like, okay, this is what things are supposed to be, and this isn't that, and so what am I supposed to do now?
Yeah.
following announcement has been paid for by the New World Order.
This episode is also brought to you in part by Makers Social. Now, Makers is located right over in the Franklinton Arts District, right here in Columbus, Ohio, the place where this podcast used to call home. Now, why I'm stoked to have Makers on board as a partner and a sponsor for this episode is, well, it's owned and operated by friend of the show and past guest, Meg Pando, and you can go check out her story, her podcast episode, anytime in the archives. That's back on episode 46. But she is a wonderful person, and Makers is a wonderful place. So, what is it? Well, Makers Social is a DIY craft project bar where you can get your hands messy with some fun projects like woodworking, leatherworking, jewelry making, painting, and more. And while you do all of this, you can drink if you want, because they also have a fully loaded bar with cocktails, local beers, and a very rare bourbon list for you bourbon collectors out there. So what's more fun than getting your craft on with some friends or family, while also maybe getting your drink on as well for a night out. And they also host private group events, such as corporate events for team building and even birthdays. So if you want to check it out, if you want to go book and make a reservation, well, you can just hop over to their website. And if you do book, right now, you can type in WYDH into the notes section of your checkout when you make the reservation to get $10 off your project's booking. So head to makerscolumbus.com if you want to check it out, or simply follow them to see what they're all about at makers.social. This episode is sponsored by the Franklinton Market. Now, what is the Franklinton Market? Well, when I had a studio over in that area, there was one thing heavily missing, and that was a convenience store. Yes, I know that sounds strange, but honestly, the area was just a food desert. And that was until Franklinton Market came in and saved the day, and yes, they even brought snacks. Now, the market is located right in the heart of the Franklinton Arts District, right there on Rich Street, which also exists as a part of River and Rich, some other partners of ours, and they offer a unique shopping experience that's tailored to meet the needs of busy urban dwellers. Now, as I stated, they conveniently feature a variety of snacks, beverages, health and beauty items, last-minute grocery items, and of course, the awesome Go Meals, a local and freshly prepared line of sandwiches, breakfast, lunch, and dinner take-and-go meals made by Chef Micah. So whether you're a regular visitor to the vibrant arts district there or just passing through, be sure to stop by the store and discover the hidden gem of the Franklinton Market. They are open daily, Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., Saturday 9 a.m. to 10 p.m., and Sunday noon to 6 p.m. And you can follow them online for more information at Franklinton MKT. That is Franklinton MKT. And I cannot thank them enough for sponsoring this episode. I want to circle back with a bit of a formal question, because you asked me this before we recorded, and I was trying to save it for this to ask you.
Yeah.
As we're talking about like life and career and all this sort of stuff that I'm so excited to keep diving into, I do want to lay it out here of like, what all do you do? You asked me that earlier. We were like, okay, so what all do you do? And then we went into this, whole rant about, all of it. But like, lay it out for me, like what all, because I know of Creative Mornings and everything. Yeah. But again, so much of what we've already talked about while on the podcast and previously, I'm like, listen to all these experiences, all these different things you've done, and you've given me kind of glimpses of all the things you've done. So lay it out for me here. Like, what all do you do? Yeah.
Well, just to kind of backtrack a little bit, my professional experience before working for myself was in teaching and learning. I was a high school teacher for like 10 years. And that love for seeing people light up when they have an insight or a new awareness is just euphoric for me. And I think that combined with, especially as I started working with adult learners and I had more time and space to really craft those experiences for people versus being in a high school classroom, what I found is that I have a real passion for like creating a container where like the whole is bigger than the parts. There's a new experience that's created when people come together as a community in an intentional way to learn and grow together. And so I love creating those types of spaces. And I've been really fortunate to be able to do that through Creative Mornings. My passion with that particular project is actually the team. Like I was coming from, the reason that I wanted to be the host is because I'm very interested in organizational development, and I'd worked with a lot of clients on that. And I was like, why is it so hard to create safe, beneficial spaces for people to do work in? Why is that so hard? And like, I had a lot of ideas on how that could be done better. And then through Creative Mornings, like creating that team and going from 4 to 25 plus people, we do everything. We have videographers, professional photographers, a social media team. Of course, we have like leadership folks. We have so many different creatives who work in that community. And like, I wanted to see what would happen if I created a container for them that I felt was that supportive organizational container that other people should be able to create and seem to struggle to do. And I don't want to criticize folks. I was able to build something from the ground up. And I understand that many people are stepping into roles where that foundation is already established and it's very hard to change. So, that's part of what I do. And then professionally, as far as how I get paid, I take those same like organizational development ideas that I use for Creative Mornings and help to make that into an actionable experience for people. And so sometimes that's things like I'm doing workshops to help leaders to develop their ability to hold space for other people through listening. I'm really interested in individual agency. And so talking to people about knowing their boundaries and being able to advocate for themselves in spaces where their needs aren't being met. I'm really interested in, instead of having the conversation about self-care, how can we create communities where people don't need to cope so hard, where maybe they're not just surviving, but they're thriving because of the community that they're a part of, not in spite of it. Or even just putting the Band-Aid on over and over. And so I work with different organizations through keynote speaking and training and facilitation, consulting to help them to implement some of those insights.
Yeah. And how long have you been doing all that?
So I've been working for myself for 10 years, and it's changed quite a bit. When I first started, the idea of personal development as professional development was new. It wasn't a thing people were doing, and especially not in the field that I was coming from, which is education. And so me talking about things like mindfulness and self-care and, gratitude and some of these tools that now, like, I feel like every workplace is like, let's talk about mindfulness. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about that. At the time, no one was doing that. And so that was the really big first wave that I caught when I started working for myself. And then, a really transformative experience for me that kind of shifted that lens from self-care to community care. And what does that look like was actually the pandemic. And so I can tell like a brief little story about just something that really shifted my perspective.
Yeah, please.
So a lot of schools had COVID money, and they were really looking to try to meet the needs of students, and they were in this like kind of crisis point. And so they would call someone like myself to come in and provide a keynote or a workshop or whatever the case may be. And I had a client call in another state, and they were in a community. It was a Native American sort of reservation community, and it had been hit like really hard by COVID. And so they'd lost community members. And they really let me know that they were in a crisis point. And so I found out a few weeks before I went out there that they had scheduled me to give a keynote presentation on the first day of in-person learning in over 2 years. So here you have like educators who are showing up for their first day. They're still terrified. They haven't been working with students. The students are traumatized. And then at the end of their workday, they throw me in there, like as if this is going to be helpful, right?
Wow.
And so I got there. The principal of the building didn't know who I was or why I was there. And they put me into this classroom, and it was supposed to be this mandatory experience, but like 10 people showed up for each session. And they were paying me a lot of money to come out there and do this. People were completely disengaged. I mean, this one woman sat in the back of the room and cried during the whole session. And I just thought, like, it is a form of gaslighting. It is an insult to bring someone like me in to talk about self-care when the situations that people find themselves in are so completely untenable. Like, that's not the angle that we're going to fix this problem. And so I kind of revamped everything I was doing to try to meet that new need. But I don't think that the world has caught up to that shift in language and need. I think we're still putting Band-Aids on things. And so then that gets into that. I don't know when that wave is going to come or if it's going to come, but I think we really have to change our language around some of these things.
Do you feel like any of that stuff had, especially talking like work culture and stuff of like mindfulness and do you feel like that is, how much of it do you think is buzzwordy and what they need to say to market their place as a good culture?
Yeah.
And how much of it do you think is there was actually a wave of people genuinely wanting the culture of their companies to be better?
That's a great question. I think that I'm not sure how much of it was wanting the culture shift, but I think they genuinely wanted to help people. I worked with a lot of clients who really wanted to help people, and that was the closest tool that they had to meet the needs of people who are in very high stress environments and have to have fast acting tools to be able to make it through. And so I think at that moment it made sense because at the time there was really nothing. But I think that as my awareness of the real needs grew, then that started to not be the solution any longer. And I think it stopped being the solution for the clients that I was working for because they were experiencing backlash, I think, from people who kind of caught on. Like, oh, this is all you're doing. You're just telling me to take care of myself. And like, that's not resolving these other really major issues that are happening here.
Yeah.
So
is that what you kind of mean? Like when you said like the, people putting Band-Aids on things, like I use that analogy a lot of like a Band-Aid on a broken window.
Yeah.
I feel like companies, brands, people effectively feel like, are often good at identifying a problem. We see the window is cracked and we put a Band-Aid in the middle of the crack. So that way at least the pieces won't fall out. But it's like, no, what we really need to work towards is replacing the window.
That's right.
Like, do you feel like you've ran into a lot of that? And maybe it's not necessarily in that work, but maybe it's just in general. Like I could be jumping ahead here.
Well, no, I mean, I was fortunate to work with clients for whom, because I was also working as a consultant, and I feel like speaking to doing a workshop or doing a keynote, like that can create momentum that moves people toward a new shift in understanding. Like I do believe in the transformative like learning model where like you can embed an insight for someone and it lands in a different way and they genuinely shift how they think about something or feel about something. So I don't want to completely discredit that. However, when I was really getting to the point where I was seeing that folks were making changes, it is in the consulting work and it's goal oriented. And so, I'm thinking of a client that I worked with for several years, and what they were looking to shift were the behavioral outcomes for students. But the way that we got there was through shifting the culture. And like one of the biggest culture shift indicators that we saw, and this came from the teachers, was that students were much more likely to say hi to teachers in the hallway because they had like built this new sense of camaraderie and community like in their school building. And there were lots of different ways that we did that. But, I've done some of that work in other types of organizations. But that's a really clear example of like, this is a goal-oriented outcome, but we actually did the work to realize that to get to this point, there were a lot of things that had to change, and they weren't just giving the students a self-regulation tool. It was really about changing that community atmosphere so that teachers and students were working together, and there was that sense of, protecting the human dignity of all people.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Because again, it's we can't just like here's a here's a keynote. It's a mandatory thing. Go and listen to the person talk, and then go right back to how we were the day before, and it doesn't matter. And like, you remembered something from that keynote, didn't you? Like, like that little bit of, we're making a move, and then we're not really like, and again, not that I've worked in a bunch of them, but I would venture to guess, and I've seen and heard plenty of stories, and I'm sure a lot of people have, of like, you see a company who does do like, here's a wellness event, here's a employee retreat or whatever, and then we're right back to regularly scheduled programming on Monday, and don't speak to me, and it's like,
that's right. Well, there's a level of inauthenticity oftentimes to those experiences, and it's actually there's a word for it now. I just read an article in the Harvard Business Review, and I was like, thank you for giving this language. It's called care washing. And essentially what it means is that when organizations are doing something as almost a form of virtue signaling to sort of say, this is what we represent, here are our values, and, in that vein, they're providing content that maybe is supportive of individual well-being, or that's how they're sort of marketing it. But the actual culture of the organization is not supportive of the strategies that would even allow them to implement it. So let's say, for example, I were to come into an organization, and part of what I'm talking about is being able to establish boundaries and having agency and being able to advocate for our own needs when those arise. That's not possible for them to do if, when they go and talk to their manager, what ends up happening is that like that manager shoots them down and makes them feel badly, and maybe even their career ambitions are put at risk because they've given real feedback in a situation. And so I think that language of like care washing, what it's representing is an inauthenticity that happens when a community wants to appear to be something that they are not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So here's something I want to hear you, I guess, you just hear your thoughts. Is like, we're talking about like the inauthenticity of, when you work at a company, you got an employee and they come to you and they set boundaries and all this sort of stuff. A lot of what you and I were also talking about is the freelance world.
Yeah.
And the navigating of boundaries and conversations with effectively, 10, 20 different bosses, that as a freelancer, you're working with all of these different people and all their different thoughts and feelings and cultures and all this sort of stuff. How have you felt like your own, like, how have you navigated your own teachings almost as a freelancer of like navigating, because again, you work at a company, you go to your boss, maybe they don't have those boundaries or whatever. What is that like as a freelancer, where you're individually speaking with each of these clients in all the different forms of stuff you've done? Because I feel like I've experienced 30 different company cultures and I'm like, wow, guess I can't set a boundary with that person because they are not receptive to it at all. Like, is there a difference, or is it one and the same, or is it even maybe not comparable?
Well, I think in a way it's not comparable, because as a freelancer, personally, I feel like I'm making individual decisions about whether I want to step into a space or not. I think when you're a full-time employee, you don't have that option. You are stepping into the space over and over and over again. And if it's unsupportive, you're swimming in the waters of like an unsupportive social and emotional community. The wear and tear that can have on people cannot be underestimated. Honestly, that's why I'm terrified if I have to get a job, because I understand the real like psychological impact of having to step into a community that's unsupportive day after day after day. And if you have a leader who isn't able to create a space where they can help you to feel heard, valued, and seen by both providing praise when it's relevant and also listening to feedback and input and making change, like being able to hear someone's truth and then make change based upon that truth. If you don't have that space in a workplace, it really is a soul-crushing experience. And I think that people navigate that in lots of different ways. And so for me as a freelancer, the bottom line is the amount of time that I am spending in a community is much shorter. And so I have been in really, really toxic spaces, but I might only be there for a certain amount of time. And then I get to make the decision of whether I want to engage or not again. That said, I have had some experiences recently where I played around a little bit with being a subcontractor for other organizations and very, very quickly realized that like that is probably the worst place to be as far as how you're going to be treated, because you don't have the rights of a full-time employee, but they're treating you like an employee. And that was the worst experience that I've had so far.
Yeah. There's so much in there that I know we were talking about earlier of like what I don't know if it terrifies me or almost just like pushes me away from even attempting it, of like, you know, the thought of, we were both kind of candidly sharing of like, hey, the last calendar year has been one of the weirdest to be a freelancer or a self-employed person, because everyone's worried about money and being working off the defense and not really wanting to trust and all this sort of stuff. And, you know, I was telling you, anytime I think about, you know, potentially getting a regular job, because there is a part of me that's like, I just want to do that and just stop, just let all my fun things be fun and whatever.
Yeah.
But man, when I think about losing the freedom as a self-employed person, like even though it's more difficult, the idea of going in and getting a quote unquote real job and not only having to worry about the culture experience of how am I being treated as an employee, or how, like, one of the biggest things for me is literally like, do I actually lose freedom in my life?
Yeah, absolutely. And you would is the answer, because we definitely exist in this capitalistic framework where our time is our value. And so regardless of how good you are at doing a thing, for a lot of these positions, you know, they're watching the amount of time that you're spending, like doing whatever the service is. And they want that 40 hours, like, or 50 hours most times. Like, I think it's so sad that, you know, like is it deli part in the 9 to 5? You know, it used to be 9 to 5. People regularly now say like 8 to 5. Like,
yeah.
And I think that most people don't even stick inside of that time frame. There are a lot of people who are working, you know, way more than 40 hours a week. And just that commitment to be in the same place at the same time, day after day, not being able to move my body if I want to, because I have to sit at this computer. Like, it sounds terrifying to me.
I know that this sounds like such an excuse because you can make anything work. And I know plenty of people do have jobs and take care of themselves outside of their jobs. But like, even for me, like one of my main go-tos, like the gym has become such a large part of my life in the last 3.5 years. And I go midday because that's when it's super convenient for me. And I'm like, all right, I got my mornings open if I want it. I'm not really a morning person, I'll be honest.
Most creatives aren't.
Yeah, because I'm a late night person.
Yeah.
But I'm like, okay, early afternoon, I hit the gym. That's almost like the kickstart of my day. And then I've got a bunch of stuff after that. Great, awesome. The thought of having a real job where I've got to go relatively 9 to 5. And then I'm like, well, then my gym routine comes to the evening. And then what else does that push back if I'm like trying to do something creative? And like if I'm recording a podcast or want to have meetings, like then I have to plan all my meetings from like 6 p.m. on, or just cram weekends with, and like, that slippery slope of like, oh wait, then I fall into the trap. Like, that sounds terrifying.
Yeah.
And pre-recording, you know, you mentioned the idea of it feels like you're labeled, or you would label yourself as unemployable.
Yeah.
And I was telling you, I feel so much of the same way because, and I don't mean this in a cocky way. I just mean it as honest confidence. Like, I believe, and in the little bit of time that I've gotten to know you today, I also believe for you, I think you or I, people like us, can walk into any business and could probably lead that company. I genuinely do believe that. I really do. And I say that out of pure confidence of just as a human being. It's not the knowledge of sales or numbers or the what even the industry is. It's the ability to help and connect with other people and lead from that culture, right? And be able to confidently step into that and be like, hey, cool, I know what we can do. Like, let's figure this out. I say all that not to say that we should go be the CEOs of companies, but more so I feel like it adds to that unemployable feeling that I also really do have, because I'm like, man, I don't think I could walk in to a company and have, you know, some low on the totem pole, you're just the graphic design guy or you're just the photographer guy. Like, hey, congrats, you brought one of your creative skills into the real world, buddy. You're just that. Because I have grown, like we said earlier, like through so many life experiences, I've understood myself as so much more. I don't like to have just one label. You know, we were talking about all the different creative endeavors and life experiences that we like to have. I have to have that.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's also why for such a long time I have chased the opposite of a normal job, is because even when I was younger and less intelligent, less mature and all this sort of stuff, I still had it in the back of my mind that I was meant to do many things. And I knew even at 18 or 19, like I didn't go to college because I was like, I don't think I can do the framework of college at that point in time. I was also completely unsure of what I would even go to school for. And I knew that my real goal, while it might not have been clear of like, I want to be a video director or a creative director or a whatever, I knew I wanted to create and make an experience for a living. And so I didn't want to go to college. I tried as quickly as I possibly could to get out of regular jobs. It took a couple of years, obviously, right? But it eventually happened. But now it's like all of that stuff that I feel like I've got balled up inside of me that like I need to be able to frolic basically throughout life, where it scares me to go into potentially a regular job and just be tasked with a thing within the boundaries that they have set, where I'm like, man, I can be providing so much more.
And I think so many people feel like that about work. And the really sad part is folks who are on the front lines in a community, folks who are client facing and are doing the work, have these really tremendous insights about how things could be better, but they have oftentimes no venue to give voice to that and then actually see the impact and change. And so there is a really disempowering quality to this, like, here's the cog and here's the place that it fits, and okay, now we're done. Because we all have a tremendous amount of insight into how things can be better based upon our experiences. And so going back to Creative Mornings, that's something that I think we've done differently, is we do have all of these creatives on the team. You know, we have, like I said, the videographers, the photographers, the social media folks, folks who are primarily concerned with the experience. We have people who their primary role and what they're passionate about is setup and registration. They want to be the first face that people see when they come in the door. But after every single event, everyone is in the same room and we're having the conversation. Okay, what went well? What could go better? And every person might have an idea it might be related to their area, but it might be related to something else. Like they saw something in that experience and they bring it to the table, and we talk about everyone's ideas equally and we make those decisions as a community. And then there is this sense of, oh, I'm more than this cog. I have value. And, you know, I'm shaping the experience of this creative project that we're endeavoring right now. And I think that's so important, and it's confusing to me why the culture of communities isn't that, because my experience with it is that when you empower people in that way, they want to share more and more of themselves and their true and unique authentic gifts, and then everything gets better. Like everything gets better. They do their job better, but the actual organization starts to function in this different way because changes are happening that need to happen in order for not only the individuals to thrive, but actually for the business to get better and to thrive.
Do you think that like that isn't the case in a lot of examples that I'm sure we could give? Like, do you think it's because that lack of like being present, like we were talking a lot about this earlier, of like everyone's in reaction mode all the time rather than proactive mode? Everyone's just sort of like, and I understand it's business. We got to make money. We got to keep the lights on. We got to, you know, all this sort of stuff. But it's like, it's just the monetary growth. It's not the actual culture growth. Like an honest example, obviously I won't share names, but you know, I know of a production agency that's based here, and you know, they're based in creativity, right? They're based in creativity and building communities and helping others be creative and all this sort of stuff. But to be completely honest, I'm close enough with them to know that their internal company culture is absolutely in the dump.
Yeah.
Like And people don't necessarily like working there. It's like they stay there because they want to like working there.
Yeah.
They're waiting for the spark. They're waiting for the thing. And like when that one thing goes right, they're like, that's why. And then it goes back to the darkness after that. And, you know, as an outsider looking in that's experienced the internal with them, I'm like, they're one of the number one examples that comes to my mind where I'm like, man, you're based off of such fun, right? And yes, I know things aren't always fun all the time. Life is very difficult. Everything is not sunshine and rainbows all the time. I fully understand that. But still, the actions we can take in reaction to when the bad things happen determine whether that was a super terrible thing or just kind of an annoying thing.
I mean, I can absolutely provide examples where with the Creative Mornings organization, something happened that was a really hard thing, but it was actually the way that we worked through it that catapulted our team to a new level of inclusivity or a new level of teamwork and camaraderie and a realization that we could accomplish more. And sometimes it's from these hard things that you don't expect. We've had to navigate relationships with other organizations that weren't necessarily operating in a way that upheld like our cultural beliefs. And then we had to come together as a whole community and say, what does it look like to respond to this from an authentic place? Like how do we want to show up, showing that we like abide by the ideals that we are proponents of at the events themselves. Like every event we read the manifesto and it's everyone is welcome and we celebrate one another, we support one another. So we can't in good faith then work with an organization, for example, that doesn't support creatives. And so like navigating those conversations has just made us stronger as a team. And I think that it is every time you as a leader make the choice to align with integrity, you're building trust, you're building that trust bank. And I wonder if what happens in a lot of organizations is, you know, the folks who are leading the organization may end up in a leadership position because they're really good performers and they're really good individual contributors. That's how people get promoted, right? You're a really good individual contributor. You're like kicking ass at this. Let's give you more responsibility. But it is a very different thing to be a really good individual contributor than it is to lead a team of people. It's a completely different skill set. They're almost entirely unrelated to each other. Mm-hmm. And so oftentimes people are put into those leadership positions. They're not given the training, they're not given the support. And what they know how to do is drive and get things done. And so they're just driving and they're getting things done, but like they're not building the folks underneath of them's confidence, and they're not building the skill sets within those people. Like that's actually a teaching skill, right? Like you're there to help people to find that spark inside of themselves and to like really show them that you see it, and then to build them up around that like spark that you see. Mm-hmm. But that's so different than being like really good at X, you know, as an individual contributor. So I think that's part of it. I think that, you know, I'm really into psychological safety and Amy Edmondson's research. And one of the things that she talks about is that hierarchical structures create very naturally fear. And so whenever you have a hierarchy, if you're in a leadership position and you are not directly mitigating the power that you have by like, you know, expressing a lot of vulnerability, by being really open to feedback, by when the feedback is given, no matter how it feels, because it's not going to feel good, like breathing through that and expressing gratitude and then coming back and having solutions for the things that people say. Like if you're not really, really actively working on that stuff all the time, you're creating a culture of default, and that culture of default is fear. People are not going to share things with you. And so I just think that we don't have really the structures and supports for leaders to be good at their job, you know?
Yes. So much of what you said in there reminds me of a conversation I had very recently. And it kind of revolved around the idea of, man, like, do you have to be an absolute asshole to actually make it to the top?
Yeah.
And I really, really want your thoughts on that, having worked with so many different organizations and companies and all this sort of stuff, and literally working with like, hey, here's how you operate, and here's all this sort of stuff that you do. Because like, I the good side of me wants to believe that that's not true. And then the realistic side of me is like, well, I see a lot of proof everywhere that it does help. And, I often say things are usually not black or white. It's not only this or only that. It's usually an amalgamation, a collection of both things. And like, hey, both sides are kind of true. Yes, you're going to be, like you said, the driver. You're going to be just really good at that one thing. You might not even be great for your position, but if you can drive through, you can make it to the top, and then you have no idea how the company operates, but you're telling people how to do it, and the employees who really know how to do the work are the ones being told what to do. That's just how jobs tend to work. But like, I go back and forth in that battle where I'm like, man, like, I can be very honest and very straightforward, and I can be stern and like no, this is how it is. But most of me is very much like, yeah, but I don't ever want to be a dickhead to anybody. I don't ever want to be an asshole to anybody unless it's really, 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 really needed, and that takes a lot. And so for me, I'm like, man, like, I don't know. It almost feeds back to that unemployable feeling where I'm like, man, if I was in a company and I was seeing somebody above me be an absolute buffoon and treat people terribly, I would be like, that's fucking stupid. Fire me if you want, because this totem pole mentality is not something I'm into. Yeah. But I feel like there's so much that revolves around like that crabs in a bucket mentality of like everybody trying to drive their way to the top and be in charge and all this sort of stuff. And I think there's something too, and I would say it's worrisome. I'm not really, I guess, thinking about it that much, but it's almost bothersome maybe, that I do think there's truth to, sometimes it's just the loudest person in the room, not the most intelligent person, who does get to eventually lead the room.
Or the kindest.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Like, what are your thoughts on that process of like, is there truth to like, sometimes it's the loudest person that just gets to be in charge, and I don't know why, or here's my theory on why, compared to the most skilled or the nicest or kindest person who is the most equipped to actually lead often is not. Like, what do you feel like that is?
So one of the things that I would say is I think that most people have good intentions. And so folks who are in leadership positions, I think the intention is to perform well, to be a good leader. That's what they're bringing to the experience. But I think it's actually the container itself that is contributing to the behaviors that so often are like eroding trust with the folks that are working for them. And part of that is, like I said, they're stepping into something that's already there. Like if you are in a position where you have power over other people at work, you don't have to do anything for people to bring their fears and their projections and, their past experiences to you. Like that's all going to show up in their interactions with you. And I think that leaders very oftentimes aren't equipped for that, like it's interesting. Sometimes if I'm interacting with someone and like they're having a really strong response to something, like in a team setting, it can be very obvious that it's coming from some past experience that they've had and that they're bringing that to the situation. But like, if you're not trained to be able to like acknowledge that someone's past experiences are from their personal life are going to show up in a professional setting, and you need to be equipped to provide like support, to allow them to work through that so that they can get to the place they need to be to do their job. So it's not therapy, but it's part of what you need to be able to do. And so I think that like culture of default is so much bigger than one individual person being an asshole. That said, I do believe that oftentimes cultures are structured so that the people who are most politically adept are able to get the positions where they then have more power. And it's really sad to me. My former partner, worked for a very large organization, and there would be these situations where one person was better at providing a case for why they should have more resources. But the reason they're providing the case for why they should have more resources is because they're, really interested in getting that next promotion that's coming up. And so ultimately what ends up happening is resources are taken from this other area where maybe that person isn't as good at promoting, but like real work needs to happen on that other team. But like the decisions that are made are based upon these like political agendas that people have and bring. And they have these major consequences, like major layoffs can happen in this way, where it's just like someone is trying to meet a certain criteria so that they look as though they are, growing a business. And meanwhile, like you have people who are losing their livelihoods, and had no idea that this was coming, and it has nothing to do with how they perform. And it's just, how can you build trust in an environment like that, And
I'm not intelligent enough to truly understand the dynamics of all of it, but you see almost daily at this point, there's some like article that pops up that's like, CEO of whatever, cashes out 5 million bonus for this year, and simultaneously they laid off 5,000, 50,000 people from the company.
That's right.
And the company is the most ill-received that it's ever been and negatively reviewed, and their products are terrible, or their service is terrible, and their culture is terrible. But this one person gets to make a bunch of money, I suppose. And this is probably a much larger conversation than what we could really dive into on this show, I guess. Because again, I don't understand those things. But you've seen versions of all of the stuff, having worked in it. Like, is it just the simple answer of like, well, yeah, business is about money, and whoever can make the most money is how. That's the success that they're going to have and how they're going to obtain that position. And yeah, everything else is thrown to the wayside sometimes. Like, and obviously I know I'm giving an example of like major companies and stuff like that. But like, I guess it's just the point I'm making isn't really a good point at all. It's just me saying it's confusing to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so I would bring up Alan Watts, I guess.
Okay.
I read a book of essays that he wrote a long time ago. And this specific example has always been such a clear model for how humanity goes wrong in things in so many ways. And so like he was talking about how money is this thing that we made up. Like we all believe in the story. Like we have this whole story and we're like, this is what money is. And then everybody's like, yeah, that's what money is. So he was talking about like during the Great Depression, there were farmers who, because they could not get money for their crops, were like taking piles and piles of food and putting gasoline all over it and setting it on fire. And there were people who were starving at the same time. And the illusion or the delusion of this resource that we have and how meaningful it becomes to us overtakes our capacity for common sense sometimes. And so we have created this game with businesses where it's like, well, the game is to make money. And like the common sense of what would actually be best for humanity and for the people within that organization, like loses all focus. Mm-hmm. It just becomes, it's like gamifying something that shouldn't be gamified. Like what are organizations for if they're not for humans? But instead we make organizations for this completely made up resource that yes has power and yes has these really meaningful reasons that we have to have it. We know, right? As freelancers, you gotta have money. So I'm not saying it doesn't matter at all, but it shouldn't matter more than common sense and humanity.
Yes.
And I think honestly, that's how I see it. Even at the highest levels, there are people who become delusional, with believing that other humans aren't real. The whole Elon Musk thing about well, maybe we're all just in a virtual simulation.
Right.
And so none of this really matters. It's so narcissistic, but then it's also so completely devoid of the things that make us like special as a species. And I think we just lose track of like all of that.
Yes. I also like, with companies and businesses and CEOs, and especially someone like Elon Musk, we've been talking about communities and again, culture to business. Like what do you feel like makes a lot of people so susceptible to awkwardly praising somebody like an Elon Musk, where is it because it's this like dream of like, I want to be him, so I believe in him so much, but I have, and maybe this is a mean thing to say, but I'm going to say it, and maybe it's not, I don't know. But like, is it people being like, I have no value in myself and see no value in myself, so I have to place this imaginary like, yeah, he does what I like to do and what I wish I could do, and he's awesome, and I want him to be more of a billionaire, and screw anybody who disagrees. Like, because talking about those leaders, and I mean, there's plenty of other leaders outside of Elon Musk that we could. I use the term leaders loosely, but there's plenty of other people who are in positions of power, who have these cult-like followings, where people are so just like, no, they're so right. And again, maybe it's a larger conversation than we have even time to dig into on this podcast. But like, that's something that fascinates me so much, is I'm like, again, in my lack of knowledge and my also just honest opinion, I'm like, do you see or do you have like so little value in who you are that you're not trying to make your world a better place or be a better person, and you're just looking for a power-hungry person to make the change that you want to see being made, even though it probably will end up having nothing to do with you? Like, I don't even know if I'm asking a proper question here. I might be rambling. But like, what is it you think that makes these like bosses and CEOs and political figures and all this sort of stuff, who are effectively, they might be intelligent in one thing, but effectively a rather unintelligent person who is more of that asshole character? What is it that draws people to that asshole character? They just see a version of what they want in them from themselves, or like? Yeah,
well, it's interesting. So as you were talking about this, like, of course, I can't not bring that to like the current sort of political climate.
100%.
And like being able to have, one of the things that I go back to is like, we're all humans. And so there is humanity that's happening in those circumstances where people feel really drawn toward a leader who has some amount of charisma, and I think more so than anything else has access to power, and that desire to see power in the ways that we have seen power in the past. Like, this is a type of power that I know, and a type of power that I understand, and it creates a sense of safety in some way. This person looks like what I have been told a successful person should look like. And I want to have faith in that, because then that validates the framework that I understand the world to be, And so I think one of the things that helps folks to want to support someone who has that sort of power is just the recognition of something that feels familiar, combined with a concern about change and the fear that's evoked from that concern of change. Like, at least this is something that I know, versus like something that I don't understand at all,
Yeah. And do you think it kind of almost goes back to that, like, at a lot of people's core, they just want that community, they want to fit in, so they're gonna just be like, oh, he said a thing that I think I agree with, and that's so cool, there's my team. I mean, it's sports also, it's like, if your sports team doesn't win and your color is red and the blue team wins, you're so furious that you break your TV, or you yell. It's like, I know that's more of an entertainment thing, but I would also argue that a lot of business and political stuff has just turned into terrible entertainment anyway.
Yeah.
But it's just such a strange, like, I have to pick a side.
Yeah. Well, to go back to, like, if we were to bring this back to the political climate and sort of what's happening there and what might be happening on the other side for people who, I mean, I'm a liberal person, I'm not in support of, like, Trump as a potential president, for example. Like, it was very confusing to me when he was able to garner so much support. But one of the things that happened around the time of his election and then in the years after, when the pandemic happened, I sort of had a crisis, like a internal crisis we were talking about before. Most of my work was live in person. I was working with schools, I was working with service organizations, and everything shut down for me for 6 months. I literally had no job, like nothing was working. And I've always really loved the outdoors. And so, long story short, eventually what we ended up doing is buying 7.5 acres, and I built an off-the-grid cabin. I was the general contractor for this cabin project and did things I never thought I would do, like serious construction sort of things. Well, one of the gifts of that is we built this cabin out in Perry County, and I got
That's where I'm from.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, outside of Junction City.
Yeah.
So, like, polar opposite culturally than I live in Grandview, polar opposite. But I really got to know that community in a very different way. And I, at the same time, had read a book, I think it's called Seven Nations, and it's about, like, the nations that are inside of the United States. And basically what that means is these cultural waves that establish different communities but have their own, like, flavor. And one of the communities that they talked about was, like, the Appalachian community and, like, the history of how they ended up in this country and what their culture is, what their norms are. And community is such a high value. And I think it's when culture started to change very quickly, it happened at the same time that these economic shifts were occurring for people who lived in these communities. And so there was that combination of fear combined with something unrecognized. And so a very human response to that is to try to grab onto something that, like, looks familiar, or someone who is, like, speaking a language that you understand. And so getting to know those communities as humans, like human to human, was really fascinating. I mean, they saw us as outsiders for sure. And we had to earn the trust of the people who had been living in this area for, many, many years, like generations of families who were living in this area. And so it was such a humanizing sort of moment and experience. And so in these situations where folks are aligning themselves with an identity or with a set of values or a particular person, and I don't understand that, like, I'm always looking for what is the humanity in that? What's the human response of, like, a combination of fear and discomfort and, just insecurity that is birthing this, like, perspective or this ideology. And it's hard to do that. Like, the Creative Mornings community is, I would definitely say we're creatives. We live in a city. It's pretty liberal, and I had a situation with a speaker just within the last couple of months where someone raised their hand to ask a question. And the way that they asked the question was, how are we going to deal with these stupid people who don't think the same way that we do? And literally use that language of stupid people. And so our speaker handled the question, like, very well. But then after he spoke, like, I felt compelled as the space holder for this community to say, by the way, as we are talking about people who feel differently than us, it's important to remember that these people are also human beings, and our value in this community is literally, it's in our manifesto. We are all welcome. And before I said it, I was like shaking like so badly, because I was like, gosh, I know how our community feels and where they probably land on a lot of these issues. But I need to say something that's just about how we show up, regardless of people feeling differently from us. And it was a really interesting situation to be in.
Yeah. Can I, like, personally, and I guess obviously that translates into professionally and stuff. Like, is it hard to keep that balance? Is it hard to put that foot forward of like, okay, I need to make sure we take the room here and remind everybody that even if somebody is maybe pretty stupid, we don't need to treat them as such. And we need to remember to not make it about us versus them and split the sides all the time. And I ask that because I feel like I have that battle a lot.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like I absolutely have two sides, and maybe everybody does, but, just to verbalize it for me is like, I feel like one side of me is like, the most like love everybody has value and all this sort of stuff, and it doesn't matter what they think or I'm like, yeah, no, there's good in everybody and we can find it, and all somebody maybe needs sometimes a little bit of help or a little bit of just being listened to, and I'm like, yeah, that's how I actively operate my life. And there's this other side of me that's like a little more internal, and I don't lead with it that much because I've got it under control. But I'll be completely honest, there's a part of me that when I do go to my hometown and I see, the flag, on their porch of Trump 2020, whatever. There is a part of me that's immediately like, you are so, and I don't really share this stuff on this podcast a lot, but I also doubt that anybody's listening to this who's really going to be shocked by this. But there is an immediate reaction to me where I'm like, man, what a dumb fucking person.
Yeah.
And it does kind of make me a little bit angry. And I'm like, how are you? And like that spark in me, right?
Yeah.
And again, I don't ever lead with that. I'm not like actively ever looking to get into political debates, and I don't even like talking about it, all this sort of stuff where I'm like, no, it's again, everybody has value, everybody's okay. People are going to think the things. I mean, I have family members who are on, who believe in certain things, and I'm like, man, I just want to like put you in your place right now.
Yeah.
But again, I'm like, it's, it's fine, it's whatever. And so again, I say all of that to say like, are you like, no, Ross, here's the couple keys to keep it under control and here's how you feel good? Or you're like, man, all the time I'm almost about to explode? Like,
well, okay, it's both for me.
Yeah.
I mean, I want to say that this is not abstract work. It's like deep internal work that I have dedicated a tremendous amount of time to. So, and it's not... What I mean by not abstract is I have actively cultivated compassion for people who I know wished to do me harm. Like that is part of my personal practice and experience. To make a really specific example, and I talk about this in one of my workshops, one of my values is compassion, and I do some values-based work with communities sometimes, and I talk about like identifying the stories where you live your value. And one of my stories is that I had a family member who was very mentally ill and struggled with addiction. And in the process of trying to support that person, I became a trigger for them. And ultimately what ended up happening, and I will try to not be super graphic about this, they became a threat to my well-being and like threatened in a very serious way myself and my family. And so ultimately I ended up being estranged from this person, and I don't have contact with them any longer. And my model has always been, I'm definitely a student of the civil rights movement. I reading like Martin Luther King's work and really internalizing the sense that the work he was doing was to have love and compassion for people who actually hoped he would die and sometimes were threatening his life. And, when he did end up dying at the hands of someone eventually, and that was a very real experience for him for many, many, many years leading up to that point. It wouldn't have been a surprise that something like that had happened. And so after this situation happened with a family member, I went on this retreat by myself for a couple of days over Martin Luther King weekend. And I spent the weekend thinking about and practicing inside of my own body, like, what does it mean to cultivate compassion for someone who wishes you harm? How do you do that? What does that look like? And that's, some of that is when the boundaries work comes in. Just because you have compassion for someone doesn't mean that you're going to allow them to hurt you. Just because like maybe someone thinks differently politically than you, and that threatens your well-being as a gay person and as a woman, like, yeah, absolutely. People are going to have different political perspectives from me. And sometimes those are going to invalidate my humanity, right? So what does it look like to do that work in those situations? And it's a combination of knowing your own human dignity and what that looks like and feels like, and curating a space inside of yourself where that is safe and you're not allowing people to come in and destroy that, combined with the recognition that just like you, that person is seeking love, they're seeking peace, they're seeking safety. They just have different ways that they are going about doing that based upon their life experience and their story. If they knew better, they would do better, And I don't mean I'm not implying that anyone is ignorant. I'm just saying we all have different journeys, and like someone feels the way they do for a legitimate reason because their life experience has told them that that is the way that they should feel. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't mean that they're not capable of change. Maybe they haven't had the same opportunities,
Right. I want to dig a little bit into like where all of this comes from for you. Like you said it way earlier that like, okay, I was teaching in high school, and then at some point that transitions into being self-employed and being a speaker and doing all these keynotes and all this sort of stuff. Like, is that like, does it all come from like first teaching and then teaching in a similar but different, world now? Or like, I guess even take me back, like how does the Brandi that's sitting here and sharing all this like knowledge and introspective, like all this sort of stuff, like where does it come from?
Well, I would say from the time that I was very young, like I had a strong sense of like, that I had some inherent human dignity and that other people did as well. And so like as a kid, I remember getting like really upset about things other kids would do and feeling like hurt and like I didn't have a place and like not really feeling like I didn't fit in, if that makes sense. And so I had that feeling, and definitely always a sense of like empathy and, that there was this is an interesting way to describe it, but part of my lived experience is that I have this sense inside of me of like an idealistic understanding of what the world could be. And then there's what the world actually is. And then between the two, there's this like ocean of grief, essentially. And so like I've navigated that my whole life. My whole life, I have felt that sense of grief where like the pain and the suffering that exists in the world, it seems like it could be different in some way. And I think that for a long time that created like a sense of me feeling alienated or alone. And then really having to kind of dive into myself and figure out like what the human experience was about. And then I had my first teacher was my grandma, and she actually died 10 years ago. And that was the beginning of when I started my business. And she was, a hippy dippy new age grandma who like did meditation and meditated in front of me and like gave me all of these books as a kid. Like she gave me these like new age books, like The Seed of the Soul and Celestine Prophecy. And so she was really like helping me to dive into like what is the nature of reality like as a teenager. And so I was really fascinated by that, but I kind of rebelled against her because there were some things that I didn't like love about her theological perspective. And I was like, listen, I'm just trying to get through my life. And during that time period where I was leaving my job and transitioning to what I do now, she was also dying, and I was also struggling in my marriage, and I got diagnosed with depression and anxiety and all of these things. And that's when I started meditating, and she wanted to talk to me about my experiences, and I was like, I'm not interested in all of your new age hippy dippy bullshit. I'm just trying to get through this experience. Like, I'm just trying to breathe through this and self-regulate a little bit. But that opened the door for me to a lot of internal work around, what does it mean to be human? And I have gone on a number of different like silent retreat experiences, ranging from like 2 weeks to a couple of days. And, you know, the insights that come from, like I was talking about the civil rights movement, like those are really based on like the same sort of premise as, you know, mindfulness and like presence building and like finding the still quiet place inside of ourselves that we can use to navigate through life and, you know, both have integrity but also have compassion for other people. And so I think that advocacy work and activism and seeking a better world, really, if people are doing it right, the internal work, that personal development piece and the mindfulness piece should really naturally ebb into like having that agency and advocacy. And that's what's happened for me. I would say definitely over the last 5 years, like the edge that comes from like really feeling strongly about communities and how they should change, unfortunately came from being a part of systems that I recognize were really, really unsupportive. And that some of that was in my family system, and this, you know, family member who brought up a lot of issues that were sort of latent in my my lineage and my family history. But then, you know, I was part of a spiritual community and someone really broke trust with me, and I saw how the system failed in that circumstance. And again, had to figure out, how do I cultivate compassion for people who are, I felt, were actively not creating a safe environment for others, and certainly were not validating my perspective and weren't creating a safe environment for me. How can I both hold this truth that is so important, and I know it's my life's work to get it out there, while also acknowledging that the person that's trying to block me is a human being, and all they're trying to do is create the thing that's above them, this organization, in the same way that money becomes like something that is above our humanity, our organizations become something that's above our humanity. And then we do things in service of them that we would never do as individual people. Mm-hmm. And so that systems thinking has really grown in me a lot over the last 5 years. And it's just really important to figure out how to navigate those sort of circumstances over and over without becoming bitter.
Yeah. Okay. There's so much stuff that I want to dig into there, but like, I want to start with, like, so you said all at the same time, things with marriage were starting to go downhill or become, you know, a problem or whatever. Grandma is getting sick, and you're also like deciding to then change your career and all this sort of stuff. Like, so during that time, you're still teaching, yes?
Yes.
Is that okay? So.
Yes.
And what's the timeline of, so you said like grandma passed away, and then you were like, I want to take a lot of what she was about, and now let's go ahead and start a new career. Like,
it wasn't that clear cut.
Yeah.
It was more like I had started, so I noticed I had transitioned from being a classroom teacher to this role called instructional coaching. And essentially, I was like, my youngest son like joked at the time, he was only like 4. He was like, you're a teacher of teachers. And so that was my job. And what I found doing that work is that the people that I was working with were like really struggling emotionally a lot of times. You know, I was seeing a lot of mental health problems, and I was like working with people who had a lot going on outside of just what was happening in the classroom. And so I thought it could be helpful to offer some workshops to them. So I made a workshop on mindfulness, growth, gratitude, and connection, those 4 topics. And it just so happened that my job basically had no job description. And so I could spend my time really doing whatever felt supportive. And so I spent like, you know, months like researching these topics and creating these like programs. And then I implemented them in the school that I was working in. And I thought that what I was going to do was leave my job and go back to school to become a counselor. And so I had a scholarship, and I was going to go to this university. But as I was in that process of making that move, my boss said to me, I think that you could do this as a business, like what you've done for us with these workshops. And I would actually like to hire you next year. So you should set up an LLC. And so it was with the support of this person who felt like what I was offering had some value, and like the timing of it was super interesting in that so much of what my grandma was about was embodied by these offerings that I was making. And I was actually with her in her death process. Like I literally had my hands on her body as she took her last breath. And it was a very, very transformative experience for me. Like it definitely felt like I remember the moment when she was passing away, like this like gasp of like air. It felt like this kind of new infusion of like life. And it actually, it had like a color, it had a feeling, it had like all of these different things. And she lived with me, like inside of me in this experience. I feel like she helped me to catch that wave. And I wrote it for a long time. And what's really interesting is I wrote a book about that 2-year time period. And that was sort of an encapsulation of like, this is what it looks like when your life falls apart. And then here's how I put it back together. Mm-hmm. I started experiencing that again 5.5 years ago. And part of the experience for me was actually feeling that light that felt like her, feeling it leave. And I was like, who am I without that? Like, I don't even know who I am because I've lived with this for all of these years, and it's helped me to build this new career, and people know me as this like light. Mm-hmm. And then it was just gone. And so I've had to, I think what came up in the absence of that was this calm stillness that allows me to show up in really, really difficult situations with a confidence and a level of compassion that is like, it feels like a new version of who I am. Mm-hmm. And it's not that fun all the time. Like, it's really not fun to be the truth teller person. And it's really not fun to sort of show up and say, when I'm talking, I had mentioned before about the boundaries in this sense of agency and advocacy, people don't want to hear that. They don't want to hear how things need to change. And as a matter of fact, like, they will stop it by any means necessary, even if it means that they need to make you feel like you should disappear, like completely. Like, people will go that far to have a sense of safety. Mm-hmm. And I don't know that I've completely come to peace with the fact that this like glowy, beautiful, like light version of me that got to do this incredible work, like nationally, and, be a speaker and do all of these things, whatever that was, like, it's gone and something else is coming, but I don't know what it is, but it has something to do with that, like helping people to find their own voice in situations where they're not getting the support that allows them to feel human, but also helping communities to shape an experience where it can hold our humanity, mm-hmm.
What was it during either that time period, or we can just maybe blanket it of like any period of major struggle or change that we just have to kind of go with and deal with and base our reactions off of, like, all right, do I make this worse, or how do I handle this? Like, what did you uncover that worked for you? What were some of the things that you were like, man, when I really, and I know it's not this simple, but just to kind of set it up in a simple way, like, when I started focusing on this, or when hey, mindfulness started to look like this for me.
Yeah.
Or, hey, meditation is a big thing that people really need to pay attention to. Or like, what were some of those things, whether during that time period or anything since, that you're like, uncovering these things has been a major help of balancing this stuff? Because we all know that there is not one easy fix that makes all the problems there one day and gone the next. It's more, how do we live with these things and move and grow on and grow and move on?
Yeah.
What does that look like for you?
Well, in the first time period, that 2-year time period that I wrote Myths of Being Human about, like, it was those workshops. That was, the concepts I was talking about were the concepts I integrated into my life. And so having some tool to self-regulate, one of the things that I'll say is, at that time in my life, like, I am a super emotional person, and my emotions were like so big that they would encompass my entire reality, and I couldn't see outside of them, even to see how other people were feeling in circumstances. And so, like, having a tool to where I could, like, see my emotion as like separate from myself and begin to work with them in a new way and self-regulate. Like that was incredibly important for me. And then just having that a little bit of silence in my day. You know, at the time I started a practice called Beautiful Moments Practice, where like I would look for any positive stimulus experience through the day and like write out what that had been. And that provided me a sense of balance. I started connecting more with, I talk about it as like some of us have like a work self and a personal self and different selves that we show in different areas. And I stopped doing that. I just had this one self, and I would bring that self and I'd be like, oh, well, I'm a fucking mess today. And like, here's what's going on. And so people showed up to me in a different way because I was being vulnerable. And, you know, and something that I've always been really big on is that reflection and reflecting back on experiences. And so that was the growth portion of the book. And that's when I talked about like reframing experiences and when we're ready to do so, reflecting upon what we've learned from them. And so the tools that I taught in the workshops came from that really genuine space. And so then in this most recent iteration, which I would describe as like, this has been as bad as that 2-year time period. I just have more tools to cope. That's really what it comes down to. This season of my life, what I've found to be really helpful is like, because it was kind of a trauma response that was showing up. I just went through so many experiences over the last years that were traumatic, like hot baths, like the stimulus of like really having that sensory input, and like a lot of walking, like walking in all seasons, walking all the time. I walk constantly. I think that's been really helpful for me. And those things they've had to be more of almost like a little bit of the Band-Aid situation. Like I'm working through stuff while I'm doing it, but I also just have needed to feel okay for that day. And those are the things that have really shown up for me this time, I would say. So, yeah.
You mentioned it earlier, and we talked a little bit about it again before we recorded in that clearly major conversation that we were having that I keep referencing. Can we talk about coming out? Because that was a very recent thing.
Yeah.
Walk me through. I mean, you said it earlier. Like, I mean, you've went your entire life. Like, and then now we come out, and we're embracing this new side of us, and all this sort of stuff. Like, maybe not new side. Maybe it's uncovering that it was there. Like, walk me through that entire process. Like, what has that journey felt like? What does it now feel like? Like,
well, it was a surprise to me. So I wasn't in the closet, and then I came out of the closet. I didn't know. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of things that, reflecting back upon my history and story, make sense in this context. But for whatever reason, I just was never able to put those pieces together so that this would have been the answer. Kind of how I started to figure out that I was gay was I had some people who came out in my life around me. And the first one was sort of, it helped me to look at my sexuality and say, you know what, I'm married to a man, but I think also I'm attracted to women. And it was kind of a non-issue, my first coming out, which actually happened a few years ago. And the only people that I told were like the closest people in my life. But when I told my partner at the time, I was like, hey, I'm bi. And he was like, yeah, I know. Like, that's how much of a non-thing it was, that it was obvious enough that I had always had like attractions to men and women. And then last October, around that time period, I had a friend who I was very close with, and she had been in a relationship with a man for 8.5 years and realized that she had feelings for a woman. And I was the only person she confided this in the beginning. And so she told me about this, and I was like, yeah, it's no big deal. Like, you know, I'm bi, whatever. And I walked with her very closely as she went through the process of, you know, having the conversations with her partner, moving into a place on her own, like doing all of these things. And the whole time I just kept thinking, God, I'm so glad that isn't me. I'm so glad it's not me, because I just couldn't imagine dismantling my life the ways that I would need to support that kind of an insight. Long story short, at some point it did become me. Like, I realized that this was something that was true about me. And I told my therapist. I was very, very upset. My therapist happens to be gay, and she basically said to me, her name is Jean. I feel like shout out to Jean.
Absolutely.
So I as soon as I realized she was the first person that I really went and had a conversation with, and I said, I think I'm gay, sobbing at this point. I had been with my partner for since a month before my 21st birthday. We've been together for 20 some years and have children and all of these things. And she basically looked at me and said, like, do not tell your partner this right now. Do not tell him. Like, you need to like sit with this and like she didn't say you need to be in a better place with it, but that was kind of the implication. And so for 2 weeks, I journaled a ton. I like looked at my entire life history differently and feelings that I'd had when I was dating people, and, tried to sort of rationalize in different ways, and got a little bit more clear for myself that I definitely did feel this way. And 2 weeks later, I told my partner, and we sort of talked through what the options might be in a situation like that. And it was clear that he was seeking like a long-term romantic monogamous partnership. And I was like, well, I'm gay. And so obviously that's not going to work. And it happened very fast from there because the last 5.5 years had been so challenging. I didn't have the emotional resource to have a long process related to this. Like, I wasn't sure if I would survive it, to be honest. And so I told him in October, 2 weeks after I realized. By December, I was looking at places. I signed a lease that started in mid-January. I got the apartment furnished, and I moved in by the 1st of March. And I've been living on my own now for 5 months. And it certainly is the thing that I always said in my life, like, you can take anything, universe, anything, but please do not take this, like this family structure, this person that has been my person for like all of these years. And so tremendous amounts of grief for me have come up, just waves and waves of grief that are like stronger than probably anything that I've ever felt as far as grief goes. But that is combined with this new experiencing of my humanity in a way that I have never experienced it before. Like, as I'm out in the world as a gay person, I recognize that like there are parts of the human experience that I wasn't accessing in the same way that other people were. And so having access to those parts, and then the surprise of feeling like a teenager at 42, like starting my life over at 42, and, online dating. I'd never online dated before. I'd never dated women before. There are just so many things that I'm doing for the first time now, and it's enlivening, and there's also something that I want to say. I didn't know that I was gay, but what I did know is that I'd lived my entire life feeling like there was something wrong with me. And I had this like amorphous ball of shame inside of my body. Like, I didn't know what it was from, but there was just something inside of me that was like, there's definitely something probably wrong with you. And like, unclear what that was. And for whatever reason, the moment that I realized I was gay, that ball of shame, which feels unrelated to my sexuality, gone. So I have this like it's actually peaceful inside of my body. And I'm 42 and I'm experiencing that for the first time in my life, like not having that ball of shame. Yeah. There's just a sense of worthiness that came up for me when I realized this, which I know is kind of very different than a lot of people. Like the knowledge creates the shame. For me, the knowledge created the sense that there was nothing wrong. Mm-hmm. So it's been really, really interesting.
How has it felt to like navigate and again, I know this question is so based in like, well, that's life for everybody, no matter what you're experiencing. Like, it's bad and it's good all at the same time. But like, for you, what has it been like navigating the like, I'm carrying this grief of this major change and life is changing and all this sort of stuff, while simultaneously experiencing an amazing, new version of myself that I've uncovered in this new, almost quote unquote teenage lifestyle. Like, we're reverting back and we're experiencing life in new ways. Like, how are you able to, maybe this is too deep of a question, maybe it's a weird question, I don't know, but like, how are you able to keep showing up as yourself in
Yeah.
any given day, having this like insane weight over here, beautiful lightness over here, and they're just meshing together. Like,
yeah. You know, I really am grateful that, and it's interesting because now I actually am not on a daily basis, like sitting down and doing a meditation. Like that's not something I'm necessarily doing anymore. But I feel like the last 5.5 years, I was just put through test after test after test to determine my own capacity. And I was being met each time with like something that felt like it was just going to tip me over the edge. Like I talked about the situation with the family member and, you know, experiencing not just estrangement with them, but for a couple of years with my entire family. And having that sense of loss of identity when your family of origin is, you know, unavailable to you emotionally and physically. And then I worked with a teacher for 8.5 years, and that teacher violated my trust in a way that allowed me to realize that not only were they not safe to work with me, they weren't safe to work with anyone. And so I fought with multiple organizations to essentially like pull their credentials and like warn communities that this person was an unsafe person. And I had trusted them more than I would have trusted a therapist. Like to go to this like very, very deep level. And there are a number of other things I could describe that have happened over the last 5.5 years, but like I feel like every one of those difficult experiences built my emotional capacity to go through the one thing that I never wanted to face. And so I just have this like capacity to feel things and experience things. And I've recognized that like that larger space that's inside of me can hold like really tremendous grief. And also, you know, the knowledge that like I'm moving more to my true self, and the joy that comes from those momentary experiences of like something happening where I'm responding in a way that I didn't know that I would respond because I've never faced that circumstance before. Mm-hmm. And it's a very exciting thing. But I think that capacity was just built, you know, it's sad. It feels like sometimes that as a human being, the ways that we become good at going through hard things is by going through hard things over and over. But that's really been my experience. I felt like everything was building up to me being able to do that in this particular circumstance. And I want to say just because if people are listening to this, you know, navigating the end of a relationship like that, we are told so many stories about what that has to look like. I mean, I was told by so many people, like, get a lawyer now. You don't know how this person is going to show up in this circumstance. Like, they're going to completely change. You're going to completely change. It's going to get contentious. Your kids are going to be traumatized, X, Y, and Z. Like, I literally had to get in an argument with a couples therapist that we were working with because she told me, like, Jamie, your partner, he could change his mind about these things you've agreed to at any moment. And I'm like, you don't know him. I actually have been with this person for 20 years. You don't know this person well enough to say something disrespectful like that to me. And I had to do that over and over. Like with my partner, you know, this is going to be traumatizing for our kids. No, it's not going to be. Because we're not going to let it be. Like, I'm not even going to entertain. We're not even going to have the conversation with our kids while you're entertaining, like, thoughts like that. Like, being so strong about the fact that, like, this could be done differently with, like, love and intention and care. And I put every bit of patience and every bit of, like, love that I had into the ending of this relationship, knowing that if I could do that, it would pay off dividends like for the rest of my life. And I think that in situations like that, it pulls out the most like reactive, fear-based, like, what is the word that I'm looking for? Like when you feel like there's not enough of something, scarcity mindset. It pulls out the scarcity mindset. When you're like, all these resources are on the table and some of them are going to be yours and some of them are going to be mine. And like, I just refused to like go into that space. And I have had private conversations with people who are ending like long relationships, and you know, the really consistent messages, this is going to be terrible for you and everyone that you love, and you're not going to be able to stop it. And I just feel like it's necessary to say, like, it doesn't have to be that. Both people do have to agree and keep working to go through the process, but especially as the person who's instigating it, like the amount of patience that you can show to this person who something is happening to them and they don't want it to be happening. Like my partner didn't get to go live a joyful gay life after this. They just lost their person, you know? And so I don't know. It's been an interesting test.
Whether this recent test or anything you've experienced in the past, I would be curious to know, like, if you look at your entire journey up until now, if you were to pick out one major lesson that you feel like you've uncovered or learned, what do you feel like that is?
I think for me, my entire life has been a process of unraveling the things that needed to be unraveled to find like my truest version of myself at that next moment. And so the thing that I think that I have learned that is most important for me is that I can trust myself to find myself. Like the answer that I might come to might not make sense to anyone else in my life, but like I really can trust myself to show up and know like what I need the next step to be to get to that truest version of myself. And like if there's anything that's ever an obstacle to becoming your more true self, who you authentically are as a person, then that, as much as it might hurt to lose that thing, it's going to be worth it in the long run because we live with just ourselves. Like as much as we can surround ourselves by loved ones, like we're alone in here. And that's what makes being human scary. But like, I think that I've really learned to accept and curate that inside part, you know?
I'm going to ask you to keep your advice cap on for a second.
Okay.
If you got the chance to prescribe one thing to like everybody in the world for 30 days, you got to do this. It's going to happen. Absolutely. What would you choose?
I mean, one of the nuances that I have found about mindfulness practice that isn't as like pat is a lot of the things that you hear about it, which are basically just like focusing on your breath and, you know, getting to calm. Like a lot of people see mindfulness as a tool to getting to calm. But what I actually see it as a tool toward is connecting with our internal experiences. And so, and with some amount of space, right? So I would say if there's something that I would suggest to every person to do for 30 days, it would be to spend a couple of minutes, even just a minute, because it's so hard to do, just like quietly noticing the sensations that are happening inside of their body with some amount of curiosity. So curiosity is a disarming emotion. If we're curious, we can't also be like nervous, angry, frustrated, etc. Like, and we can, but the curiosity creates something else that can walk alongside it. And so I think that if folks can find a place to be alone for a minute and then just sort of notice those internal sensations and like have a bit of curiosity about them, like we are actually attuned to be able to know what we need.
Yeah.
And we become really, really disconnected from that for all of the reasons we've talked about today. But every single one of us actually does sort of know inside of our own being what's right for us.
Brandi, I feel like we could make this like a 6-hour episode and I would just be like, yep, and let's talk about this and let's talk about that. It's funny, I had a meeting, I think I might have told you this earlier, like I had a meeting with Meg a couple days ago at this point. And I told her I was going to have you on the show. She immediately was like, I love that. She's like, you guys are going to be best friends when it's done. And I'm like, amazing. I think she was right.
Yeah.
Literally, like, I mean, we've in total talked for about 3 hours.
Wow.
Both on podcast and off. And this has literally been a blast. And I feel like we haven't even scratched really the surface kind of what I feel like we could dive into and the knowledge that I feel like you hold in so many things. I feel like I almost threw the format out the window of like, I feel like we sort of talked about like your life and career trajectory a little bit, but we also just like covered so many amazing things. Like, I cannot thank you enough for like sharing everything that you've shared today.
Well, thank you for having me in at this particular moment of my life. I feel like every time as a storyteller and as a teacher, every time I like share this more recent experience that I've gone through, it helps me to clarify and make meaning. And so it's just it's well timed to be able to have a conversation and reflect.
Yeah. So if I were to ask you at this point in time, like the cliche question of like, what's next, right? And I'm not talking like 5-year plan or something like that, but like, if you're looking ahead, is it like, man, dream goals, I want to expand Creative Mornings in this way, or I individually am going to start coaching and consulting in this way, like any like fun, like dreams, ideas, goals that you're looking forward to, like that you're trying to put the work into to make happen? Or right now, is it like, we're in a transition? We talked about an hour before this of, I don't know what's going on with my freelance career, so I have no idea. Like, what's that look like for you?
I mean, I truly don't know. I am trying to stay open to possibilities. I'm in a place right now where I'm doubling down on the relationships that I have had with people who have supported my work in the past. And believe me when I say, I have a new angle that I'm taking at this thing. And they're like, how can I help you to do that? So this transition, I don't know if people are ready for it yet. The transition from talking about like self-care and things like that to moving into this space where we're recognizing the limitations of that. And we're really talking about like how to create communities that support the well-being of people through this like more transparent leadership model where leaders are really there to help funnel information from where it was to where it needs to be. That's really where I see the role of leadership in organizations. And ultimately, I would love to help support that next wave of what we need to help organizations to be more attuned to what's happening internally so that people can feel heard, valued, and seen, but also so that those real changes that need to happen can begin to happen. That's what I would really like love to do if I can, like we talked about, if I can like find the language to catch that wave and make that happen, that would feel really good for me. And I'm, like you said, hesitant on the 5-year plan because as we talked about before, if you would have told me a year ago, within a year, you're going to realize that you're gay. You're going to be living in a different place. Your life is going to look totally different than it does right now. I would not have believed that. And so who knows what's going to happen in 6 months, but that's what makes things like really exciting.
Yeah, 100%. No, okay. Before we wrap up, I have a selfish question that I meant to ask earlier. How did you get started in consulting?
Yeah.
Like even if it's like a simple, like, hey, here's the 3 main things. It's like, that's something that's always interested me a lot. And I'm like, man, I don't know how to get anyone to value what I think, to want to just sit down and let me consult with them. Like, how does a process like that work?
So I think that having some other offer, if you're doing it freelance, the way that it worked for me was having some other smaller offerings that can begin to allow clients to see the value that you might bring. And so I started out by doing primarily workshops because even from that venue, like to work up to keynote speaking is kind of like, that's a leap, right? But having those like teaching and learning experiences where we're talking about skills that then people can take and implement into other places, then we can start to have the conversations of like, how does this lead into other goals that you have and your larger goals? And then, well, how can I help and support with the skills that I have to help you to meet those goals? It was kind of a natural outcropping of that. So like I would facilitate something and then we would talk about like other things that they wanted to accomplish and how some of the tools that I was bringing might help them to accomplish those things. But one of the things about freelancing, as you know, is that different things pop at different times. So currently I'm not doing any consulting work. Currently I'm only doing keynote speaking and workshops. But that could come back around at some point.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. I'm probably going to be like messaging you at some point in the future. Like, Hey, can we get coffee and talk
Of
more about
course.
this thing?
Yeah.
And just about anything in general. I feel like I could have 100 more questions for you, but we're going to wrap it up with one final one.
Okay.
I end every one of these episodes with the same question. So now I'm tossing it your way. So right now, we're going to end on a hypothetical, but I want you to pretend that everybody around the world, we talked about prescribing people something to do every day, right? But now you get one opportunity to talk to everybody. Everybody's listening to you. Everybody can hear you speak right now. We're throwing logic out the window. So you've got a live mic attached to everybody around the world. You get to share one thing with them in this moment. What are you telling them, and what do you really want them to hear?
How much time do I have?
As much as you want.
I mean, I'm a speaker for a living, so I can talk a lot.
Let's take it wherever you want to take it.
I mean, I think that it really does have to do with finding that quiet part of ourselves. So an anecdote that I share when I am facilitating my workshops around boundaries is a conversation that Oprah was having with Maya Angelou. And in the conversation, she said, "What's the best advice that you've ever given?" Oprah asked this of Maya. And she said that her son was having trouble at school making friends. And so she was giving him some advice. And the first thing that she said is, well, first of all, to have a friend, you need to be a friend. And then she said, but also there's this part inside of you, this place, and it needs to remain pristine and clean. And if someone else steps in there, it's your job to say no, like you don't belong here. And her language that she said is because that might be the place where you meet and talk to God. And how I would frame that is the place where we hear ourselves. That is the place where we hear our own natural wisdom and intuition about like what we're here for, you know? And so I would definitely want to share with people that every single one of us has that place. Every single one of us has a meaningful, purposeful identity and location and set of skills that we are like lending to the universe for the moment that we're here, and that they have value that they're contributing, and we just need to curate that place inside of ourselves, and like through a process of having boundaries, but also spending time alone, learn to trust that place.
Brandi, I am so happy we got to make this happen. It took a couple reschedules, but we nailed it down and we made it happen. I cannot thank you enough. And I'll probably say it once we stop recording and before you leave, I'm going to be like, thank you 100 more times. Thank you for giving me your time and just like being down to, again, this is one of those episodes where I'm meeting somebody for the very first time, and we just sat and chatted about everything for like 2-3+ hours at this point. Thank you so much.
You are very welcome. Thank you for having me here. It's really been a pleasure.
Before we tell everybody else goodbye, do you want them to check out Creative Mornings? Like what is it? Where can they find it? Or if they want to hit you up for anything, do you want people to find you online? Like plugs and promotions time here before we say goodbye. Like what do you want them to check out?
Sure. Well, if folks are interested, if you're listening to this in Columbus, we have a local chapter of Creative Mornings. If you just go to creativemornings.com, we do have a specific page for our city and for all 226 cities across the globe that have chapters for Creative Mornings. And so you can sign up for our email newsletter there to get all of the updates. Our events are always the third Friday of the month from 8:30 to 10. So you can add that as a repeating event on your calendar. You do have to register for those before you attend, but they're always free. And we feature a free breakfast and a lecture with a creative from our community, just incredible, incredible people. And then if folks are interested in connecting with me, especially if they're in organizations and they want to find out how we might be able to collaborate, my website is just brandilust.com. So I'm easy to find.
Beautiful. This was so much fun. Thank you. Thank you so much.